This is Ranger Kidwell Ross, the director of the World Sweeping Association and the editor of worldsweeper.com. And on the other panel, you see Phil Duncan. Phil is a principal with BindDesk Insurance Agency. He has also become very knowledgeable about the power sweeping and pavement segments of commercial liability insurance, and has agreed to talk to us today about something that's really emerging these days, which is pollution liability. And I coincidentally just am in process of doing an article on microplastics, and have learned a lot about pollution as a result of that. But just to show you the levels of pollution that are out there, think about how many pieces of plastic you might ingest 5 millimeters or under, which are called microplastics, per year. And that's just one of the many pollutants out there. And the answer is, on average, 70,000. We all average about 70,000 pieces of plastic that we bring into our bodies under 5 millimeters a year. So believe me when I say there are a lot of other much more toxic items out there, and Phil's going to fill you in on that with a little presentation on the pollution insurance liability problem. And a lot of you don't realize how endemic pollution is these days and how easy it is to become liable for it, and that your policies do not cover if you don't have pollution liability insurance. So from that, take it away, Phil.
Excellent. It was almost on cue. Right when we started talking, one of those leaf blowers came right by my computer, just blowing out the pollution. I could smell the leaf blower fumes. So it was kind of right on cue. So that's why I muted myself to not pick up that fun sound we hear when we hear those blowers. So yeah, thank you, Ranger, for the opportunity to share this information. And the last thing anybody wants to hear is why do you need more insurance, right? The whole point of insurance, just as a reminder, is to transfer risk. And the last thing you want to get caught is holding the bag when you're found liable for something. And unfortunately, the way a lot of these contracts read with your customers and with the vendors you work with is they put it all on your back. If you're on their property, they're going to blame you if something happens, even if it has nothing to do with you. I know one of the sweeping contractors I work with, there was an oil leak. A car parked there had an oil leak. The sweeping contractor did not have in their contract to clean up oil leaks, so they left the oil leak because they didn't want to get involved with the pollution cleanup and everything. And then some person randomly slipped and fell on the oil leak, and they tried to bring the contractor into the lawsuit, even though it had nothing to do with them. And a big part of that is because they are not responsible to do environmental cleanup. Usually, oil and any sort of materials like that are usually not in the purvey of the work of what you're doing. So if that is type of you're hired to clean up some of these chemicals like that or oil or anything, I highly recommend that you have a pollution policy if you don't already. And then just be aware that your current insurance policies in many cases aren't going to cover that work related to that. But with that said, I'm going to share a little presentation I put together, and as we go through this, if there's something that you really want to read, you can pause the video and read it. Or what Ranger will do at the end of this is when he shares this information out, I'm going to give him a copy of the presentation, and he can put a link to it. So I don't think anybody's aggressively writing notes on these things, but if you are a note taker and this is a hot topic to you, you'll have a chance to review this presentation after in a form of a link. All right. So pollution liability, what does it cover and why do you need it? So I thought it'd be pertinent to start off with the definition of how insurance companies define pollution. And it's just the contamination of an environment by substances regarded as pollutants. So that's a pretty broad definition. And they purposely make this definition broad because they want as many reasons as possible to not pay out a claim if it's related to anything that might be considered pollution. So how does pollution happen? Well, it's going to be pollution or contamination caused by oil, or it's going to be a discharge, dispersal, release, or escape of pretty much anything else. Like if you see this, they say smoke, vapor, soot, fumes, and then they add this other irritants, contaminants, or pollutants. And these are really broad, what's an irritant? What's a contaminant? What's a pollutant? It can be anything that they deem necessary. So in addition to the fumes and acids and the liquids and gases, anything. So the reason why this topic's important is that most policies exclude pollution. Most of the insurance policies that you have, and in most cases, there's three primary policies that a sweeping and asphalt maintenance contractor might have. You're going to have general liability, commercial auto, and workers' compensation. Those are the three kind of pillars of insurance that you might purchase. So this language right here comes right out of the standard commercial auto policy form. This is how they define and they exclude pollution. They say, we're going to exclude pollution. We're going to exclude bodily injury or property damage arising out of the actual, alleged, or threatened discharge, dispersal, seepage, migration, release, or escape of pollutants. So it can be transported in the course of transit, being stored, disposed of, treated. And if you have a vehicle that's on that commercial auto policy and it does something that leads to someone, a bodily injury or a property damage claim, they're saying right now, we're going to exclude that. Now, there is a minor exception to this, which is paragraph A. This doesn't apply to fuels, lubricants, fluids, exhaust gases, and other similar pollutants that are needed for or result from the normal electrical, hydraulic, or mechanical functioning of the covered auto. So as long as it's part of the vehicle, it's what's needed to make the vehicle, there is a little bit of coverage here, but it's very limited. There might be something. There was a scenario where we had a trucker. His diesel tank was punctured, and for about 10 miles he didn't realize it, but his diesel fuel was leaking on the highway as he was driving, and the next thing you know, it says he's out of gas when he just filled up, and it turns out he dropped 150 gallons of diesel fuel on a stretch of about 15 miles, and his auto policy didn't cover it. There was a major cleanup, an environmental impact. They had to go tear up that whole, pavement area, that asphalt, and go replace it. And that company got hit pretty hard. And fortunately, in their contract, they had a pollution policy that picked it up. But their auto, he was driving his auto, he was driving his truck caused the loss. He went to go put the claim in against his auto. They declined it. And again, fortunately, he had that pollution policy to pick it up because it wasn't necessarily a loss that applied from, the fuels needed to run the vehicle. It was damage to the vehicle that then created this seepage, migration, release of pollutants. So they were able to use this very broad exclusion language in the auto policy to decline the coverage. So then many cases, if that what would happen if that happened to you? You would say, okay, well, if my auto doesn't cover it, well, maybe my general liability covers it. And then the same thing, the general liability policy, if you look, it's even a broader definition of what pollution is. They start with that same thing, and then they even expand it a little bit more, and they start adding heat, smoke, and fumes from a hostile fire. And then they start talking about, well, it's not just, if it's at your place. So if you are storing your vehicle, and you're in a garage or in your own property, it's telling you we're not going to cover it at your premise. And then it's also saying we're also not going to cover it if it's off your premise, if it's at some other location. And in the sweeping business, I mean, you don't get paid to sweep your own house and clean up your own parking lot. So this is always your liability policies is typically not covering your premise. It's usually the exposure you have when you're at a customer's premise, cleaning up their location. So again, this is saying it gives a little bit of that protection here. Well, if it comes from, however, this subparagraph does not apply if this happens from lubricants or other fluids which are needed to perform normal electrical, hydraulic, mechanical functions, in the operations of mobile equipment. So they give you a little bit back of it, but if you see, they're going to go and take it right back away and say, we're also not going to cover any losses that come from any request, demand, order, statutory, regulatory requirement that requires you to test, monitor, clean up, remove, contain, treat, detoxify, or neutralize these pollutants. So not only they're going to not cover you to clean up the area, they're going to only cover the liability that you have due to the loss, but they're not going to take care of the cleanup. And then if the government gets on your back because you polluted a river or something crazy and you hit some environmental impact, well, now they're also not going to cover any claim or suit brought on by a governmental authority because of the testing, monitoring, cleaning up, and neutralizing of these toxins. So again, this is a standard general liability exclusion. The policy you have might be a little bit different. It's something to be aware of, and it's something you can discuss with your current insurance agent, or take advantage of the member benefit you have. As a World Sweeping Association member, I would love to go over your policies with you. It's a no-charge review of your insurance, and we just want to make sure what you have and what you don't have, and we can point out some of these potential gaps in coverage and provide solutions if needed. And again, I can also, if you're really happy with your broker and they do good service, well, we can also schedule a call with your broker and just review some of these items together with the policies that you have. So now that you know what the problem is and you know that your current insurance policies most likely don't cover pollution, well, what's the solution? The worst thing you can do is have someone tell you have a problem and then not tell you how to fix it. So part of the benefit of being the World Sweeper Association member is we want to teach you how to solve problems. So the solution is getting a pollution liability policy. So this is the agreement of a standard pollution liability policy. They're going to pay the sums in excess of the deductible for bodily injury or property damage to which this insurance applies. So this is going to hit to your limits. So whatever limit of insurance, you might just want to get $100,000 of pollution liability, or you might want to get $1 million. Whatever that limit is that you have, these pollution policies are going to cover up to that limit. It's going to cover the stuff that those other two policies, the auto and the general liability policy, exclude. And the insurance is going to apply to the loss if it occurs during the policy period, the loss takes place in the coverage territory, and the loss arises out of your work. So those are the three conditions. You have to have a policy that was in force. So you can't buy a pollution policy today to cover something that happened 2 weeks ago. You can't buy a pollution policy that covers your work in a certain state, and then you go do work in another state, and you never inform the insurance company that you plan on doing out-of-state work. And then these policies are only going to cover your work. They're not going to step up and defend if you're on a job site and a claim comes up from some other, vendor, some other contractor that's on the site. The plumber broke a pipe, and you just happen to be on the lot sweeping when it happened. Well, they're not going to cover that pollution that came up from the work that happened from that other contractor. These policies only cover your work. And again, in the event the loss continues to take place during multiple policy periods for all policies issued by us, the bodily injury and property damage will be deemed to take place during the earliest period for which the loss commenced. So when the loss starts, that's the policy term that's going to pick up that claim. And this is a pretty broad condition right here. This is now we know what is the condition. How does my contractor pollution policy coverage trigger? Well, this is a condition. It just means the discharge, dispersal, release, escape, migration, seepage of any solid, liquid, gaseous, or thermal material, matter, irritant, or contaminant, including smoke, soot, vapors, fumes, acid, alkalis, chemicals, hazardous substances, hazardous materials, low-level radiological material, waste materials, including medical, infectious, pathological waste, on, into, or upon land and structures thereupon, the atmosphere, the surface water, or groundwater. So it's everything that those other policies said we're not going to do, this starts to give it back to you with a pollution liability policy. So if you don't have this type of coverage right now, your current insurance agent can most likely get it for you. If they can't, we can help you out. Reach out to me, and I'll make sure I get you a very affordable quote. Typically, $1 million of pollution coverage is right around $1,500 for the exposure that you have, because you're not in the business of transporting pollution, but you might have some exposure, due to the actions of your business. There might have been something on the lot that you weren't aware of when you were doing the sweeping. It moved it to a gutter. The gutter then polluted a local stream, and then there's a big environmental impact claim, and they find out that the pollution came from the local Walmart parking lot that you just happen to be cleaning. Walmart gets sued. You have a contract with Walmart that says you have to indemnify them, and they're going to pull you into that lawsuit. So this is a policy that's going to protect you from those odd scenarios.
I'm going to jump in with another scenario here, Phil. That is, if there are many contractors that don't dump at each client's location. They might dump back at their location, or they might wait until they do several clients and then take it off to the dump. If you've done that, there's no way for anybody to really know where that material came from conclusively. So you'd be on the hook, and there wouldn't be a Walmart or any other deep pockets to take over for you. And that's something that I have seen happen several times in the years that I've covered the industry. And they don't really know where it came from, but it's there. It's definitely polluted, and then finding somebody to get on the hook for that could be really difficult. It's interesting that with so much pollution out there these days, it makes perfect sense that pollution liability coverage is I believe being put into some contracts. Do you cover that information with this, Phil?
Yeah, I do. What I wanted to do is, right before we jump into that, I have this. One of the insurance companies I work with just gave me this nice little kind of write-up that I'm going to show you right here. That just, here's some of these exposures. Are you a small business contractor vulnerable to these everyday risk exposures? So there's this mold and water intrusion exposure. So let's say there's some water that built up, and some mold ends up growing in there and someone gets sick from that mold, there is some mold, potential mold exposure. There's this accidental seepage exposure. So in this scenario, while repairing a clogged wastewater pipe for a homeowner, a plumber inadvertently causes an effluent release and causes damage to the homeowner's property. This results in a loss sustained by the homeowner, including cleanup costs, replacement of the damaged personal property, and then the restoration costs. And then maybe some demolition work. So I know some of our members do construction site cleanup. There might be some construction site cleanup from some demo work, and this kind of pulls in, right? Some pumps cutting fluid mistakenly into a storm drain. The drain refeeds into a retention pond and causes contamination. This results in the cleanup costs and lab expense. So this is a really, really plausible scenario where you might not even be aware, like you're saying, that there was something on the lot or on the, where you're doing your cleanup, and next thing you know, you moved it into some area that caused some serious problems.
Can't everybody out there just imagine that the general contractor or a subcontractor, where you're going to go out and sweep their property, they have a release of some kind of pollutant, and they say, hey boss, this is what happened, what do we do? And I can just hear the foreman saying, well, the sweeper's coming, we'll let him clean it up, whether he knows it's up or not. And then you dump it at your place. Let's say you do screening, so you're dumping your material at your place, now it runs off. And how do you show for sure where that pollutant came from? Anyway, it certainly does seem like it's a new moving target here for what's going on to try to blame the sweeping contractor for. So that's why I felt it important to have you talk about it, Phil.
One other example, like a hypothetical scenario, would be if you get in an accident. Let's say you hit someone hauling hazardous waste, right? Like, let's just say that might happen. You're driving your sweeper and one of your employees falls asleep at the wheel and slams into a truck hauling diesel, right? And then that diesel spills all over. Well, your policies aren't going to cover that, the cleanup and such. They'll cover the liability that you might have, if there's some bodily injury or property damage, but they're not going to pick up the pollution exposure. So in addition to, your current insurance not having it, as you mentioned earlier, well, now you have contracts that are requiring you to have pollution insurance. So this is an example of a contractual requirement that you might see when you take a new job. So they start telling you, okay, you're going to need general liability with certain limits. They want some additional insureds. You got to make sure it covers the work that you're doing. You need to have auto liability insurance, and we want you to have workers' compensation insurance. And we need a waiver of subrogation as well for the workers' comp. And they start stacking all these requirements in the insurance section of the contract. And then they slip this new one in: contractors' pollution liability insurance. So this is pretty standard language. If the subcontractor and its subcontractors or suppliers, regardless of tier, perform remediation of hazardous materials, or if their operations create an exposure to hazardous materials, as those terms are defined in federal, state, or local law, or if specified in the instructions to the bidders or other subcontractors attachment, subcontractor and its subcontractors and suppliers must obtain a contractor's pollution liability policy. So we already know that the general liability, the auto liability exclude contractor's pollution, so we can't use that to satisfy this requirement. You have to get a whole separate policy. That's the one that we just looked over. And this is a key term, as those terms are defined in federal, state, or local law. So depending on the state you operate, the municipality you work in, they might define pollution a little bit different. They might accept what you have, but ultimately it can get trumped by the the general contractor or the vendor, if they tell you you need to have contractors pollution liability insurance, you're going to have to get it. And there's not really a way around it other than getting them to give an amendment to your subcontractor agreement that says that they waive the requirement for you to have this type of insurance. Now, even though they waive that requirement, it doesn't relieve you of your liability, that exposure. So even if they waive the requirement and you get sued and you just don't have the insurance to cover that type of loss, then you're, quote, you're self-insuring it. You're picking up that risk. So it's similar to in your vehicle, if you don't get comp and collision, you just get liability for your auto insurance and you get in a car accident. Well, you just told the insurance company you only wanted liability. They're not going to pay you back to fix your car. You're responsible for fixing your car. In that scenario, you're self-insuring your comp and collision or your physical damage. Same thing here. If one of your clients allows you to waive your contractor pollution liability insurance requirement, you're still responsible for it. You're just self-insuring it, and they're not making you buy it, but you can still be held liable for it. So, with that said, thank you. And per our the World Sweeping Association kind of slogan, we're providing the power sweeping community with the resources and information needed for effective decision making in the 21st century. And we hope that this presentation on pollution liability is informing you to make that type of decision.
Well, thanks a lot, Phil. That's a very nice overview of this latest type of liability that people are facing. And so I will put a panel down to make sure everybody knows how to reach you at the end of the video. And again, Phil has really done a lot of work and investigation to become very familiar with our industry. And he has been quite, I say successful. It's not your success, it's the contractors' success for you looking at their policies and pointing out pitfalls and so forth that people that are not familiar with sweeping and or pavement maintenance and that sort of thing, they just don't know what all the liabilities are. So thanks for having yet another presentation with us, Phil, and you're just definitely an asset to the association. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ranger, I'll let you know as I begin calling the members as well. So you'll probably be getting a phone call from me in the coming weeks. I'm reaching out to a couple people every day. So if you're on my list to call, it's just to let you know and remind you to take advantage of this policy review. And I look forward to speaking with you directly.
All right. Thank you.